What are some ways that you measure and track health without participating in fat phobia?
So, I saw this video on TikTok at Megs for Fun, and I've seen a few people talk about it, and essentially the topic is, how do you work out without being fat phobic? And I think that's a really interesting question because it implies that being fat phobic is bad. And I know that me saying being fat phobic isn't bad is going to tilt some heads. But there's a few reasons I want, and it depends on how you determine what your fat phobic is. I'm not scared of fat people. I don't see fat people different. Fat people do get discriminated against. These are all facts, and they don't deserve that type of shit. But let me lay out some really other true facts. There is nothing wrong with wanting to look good. The simple fact is that somebody who's on a show like My 600 Pound Life or is morbidly obese are putting themselves at risk for heart disease, for cancer, for diabetes, amongst many other things. And it's not just the physical problems that we have to look at, right? There's also the mental and emotional factors that play a huge role into this. So often when we look at, there's a direct correlation between being obese and then not having control of other factors in your life. And it's just pretty simple. Look, if you can't control the food you're eating, then chances might be that you are at an increased risk for not being able to control the times you wake up in the morning, going to a job, exercising, etc. And I'm not saying that it applies to all facets. You know, I've known morbidly obese people, or even just overweight people on that factor, who have kept a job. And then I've known skinny dudes who are broke bums. So I'm not saying that being obese necessarily correlates that. I'm just saying there is, at least in some part, a link. Then we also have to look at the mental health risk and factors. So there's been several studies that have been linked, showing obesity linked to anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder, past trauma. Oftentimes what happens, if you just look, for example, at the show My 600 Pound Life, a lot of them aren't eating like that because they're happy and enjoying it. It's because either they're addicted, or they had some type of trauma, or they are already dealing with something that might not be related in some sense, like anxiety, depression, and they're self-medicating in the form of shoveling down 3,000 plus calories a day. Next, let's not lower the severity of this. It is an addiction oftentimes. So let's look at some of the signs of addiction, right? Obsessive thoughts and actions. Constantly thinking about it, constantly wanting it, constantly eating it. Disregard of harm caused. That goes without saying. A lot of them are overweight. Some of them are put on oxygen tubes at a young age, and a lot of them die early. You see a lot of fat people and you see a lot of old people, but you don't see a lot of fat old people. Loss of control. They're eating way more than they need. They can't take care of themselves. They have people who are sometimes it's like they have children taking care of them when it should be the other way around. Denial of addiction or hiding drug use. Well, not just drug use, but food, for example. They could be like, oh, it's not that bad, or, oh, it's my genetics. I've seen that popular thing where people blame the genetics. And it's like, that's rarely ever the case. And let me argue this, right? Let's say it is your genetics. Okay, cool. Why would you make it worse? Why would you add to something that's already bad by eating more?
So I'll go first. My first inclination for it is I have started running again, and I am focusing on positive gains for running. Am I building strength? Am I building stamina? Am I building speed? And not focusing on what I'm losing, say weight, inches, whatever.
So then let's go ahead and tackle another thing, is it bad to look good just for the purpose of looking good, of aesthetics? I don't think so in any way. For example, people often will say love at first sight, but this is obviously not true. What this is it's a baseline attraction to what you're seeing. And truth be told, there are plenty of people who, once they gain 200, 300 pounds, just don't look good. They just don't. And if you think they do, then try competing with the Giga Chads who are ripped, who are fit, who are lean. And you're not going to have any chance, bro. You're just not. So it's not bad to do it. It's a motivator. Why is that bad? Why is that bad to want to look good? Just answer me that. And oftentimes what happens is it's the same regurgitated shit that happened last time. Oh, that's fat phobic, that's fat phobic, that's fat phobic. It's like a lot of times with the fat acceptance movements, they don't actually use arguments, they just use buzzwords and the same regurgitated shit that they used last time. So that way our youth don't get improved, right? So to that point, speaking of the obesity crisis, about 42.4% of Americans are either overweight or obese. That's almost half of them. That's kind of staggering, and that number has jumped up from about 30.5% to that 42.4% from about 1999 to 2017, 2018, which is scary.
I literally cannot weigh myself right now because my scale doesn't have batteries in it. I've gotten rid of my tape measures, so I can't do any of those things.
And to that point of these people who are overweight or obese offering advice on eating and stuff, I just think that's kind of silly. Look, okay, it's one thing if you're saying, look, I had an experience, here's why you shouldn't do it. I'm speaking from it. But then to say, oh, well, it's safe to do, or it's healthy to do, or, oh, don't worry about what you eat, or don't diet, or don't look at the scale. Dude, who are you to give advice? Look where you're at. Look how you look. There's no way you should be giving advice. It's kind of silly, right? It's the same thing where these Facebook moms want to give advice. And then they want to say, oh, well, I'm more knowledgeable than the doctors. You're just not, it's the whole COVID thing, right? With the Facebook moms want to say, I just know more than these doctors who have studied and been in medical school for years. And then, so when you have all these doctors saying like, hey, maybe you should use a scale, maybe you should track your meals. For the average person, that works. But unfortunately, a lot of these people who do have mental illnesses or some type of affliction, unfortunately, which I wish them a speedy recovery, that negatively impacts them. They can't look at the scale like a normal person would. They can't track their calories like a normal person would. They can't do any of that because their addiction has them gripped. And because when they do try to track any of that, it spirals them out of control. They have an adverse reaction to it. And it can put them in a really sour mood. So to offer you advice and say you shouldn't do that is bad. So how do we deal with that? Well, one goal is exposure therapy, right? So the biggest goal of exposure therapy is to gradually expose them to something they might be anxious or afraid of in hopes that they'll do better with it instead of trying to avoid it. And that way, hopefully, they can live a more normal life, a better quality of life. So, of course, there's in vivo, imaginal, and then there's flooding, and those are the three types of exposure therapy. And these have been shown to help people who, like, for example, let's say they have social anxiety, they can't talk to people very well. Well, you put them out there little by little by little by little, and eventually they show improvement. So for the case of people like this, you could little by little introduce them to dieting, introduce them to exercising, introduce them to anything that they might be running away from. And it is scary, and I'm not saying that this is guaranteed 100% of the time to work, because I've lived with an eating disorder myself for a long time, and I can't speak to everybody, but I can tell you through the therapy I've got and through the experience I've received and through my therapist's recommendation, I've been able to maintain a much healthier weight and been able to do a lot more things from when I was 270 pounds, which was not good at all. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about, we're talking about we shouldn't be fat phobic or we shouldn't be afraid of being fat. But the truth is, fear motivation is one of the biggest things that help. But the fear of failure really pushes people. Now, obviously you don't want to white knuckle everything and just balls to the wall, but the idea is you know what's going to happen. It's like with anti-smoking ads, for example. Right? I'm not saying it should be the only option, for example, but when you combine it with, okay, look, here's what's going to happen if you don't change. Everybody knows that, but it's a healthy reminder, but not just using fear as a motivator, right? But then you combine it with positive affirmations. For example, here's what could happen if you lose weight. You could start eating better. You could start exercising more. You'd have a longer life. Maybe you get off your medications. It might improve your mental health. You get what I'm saying? Look, I'm not insulting anybody who's overweight, but the fat movement is scary because it's almost like an easier way to lack accountability. Thank you all. If you disagree with me, please let me know down in the comments below. If I missed anything, please add to this. As always, I'm open to a dialogue and maybe you'll change my mind. And if so, I'd look forward to hearing any information. I don't pretend to know everything. I know these topics are sensitive. So until next time, bye-bye.